Welcome to the Fall Play YouTube channel. Well, everybody, it's Thursday, so it's time. It must be time to do some MaM rambling. Or we just want to talk about what seems to be, eating us at the moment in our MaM research. Our panel today is Daywalker, Sammy, BB, OB1, and Myard. That's an excellent panel today. I wanted to start off. OB1, are you ready? Lay it on us, pal. What's in your craw today?
This is going to be long. So
you got time.
You guys are all buckled in.
Go for it, man.
Got popcorn is ready
in hand. Ah.
All right, so I have everything basically written out because I had what do I want to say? I had a theory already created and written out, which was called Operation Blindside. Blindside.
Now we can find you on Twitter and Reddit. You're a very prolific Twitterer and Redditor, and you have the same name, Obi-Wan Benobi. If you wanna say your Twitter, if you want to call out your Reddit, have at it. Now's your chance.
It's I believe it's under BenBar80, or you can just type in Obi-Wan Benobi.
Awesome. Okay, lay this theory on us, man.
So I'm sure y'all have heard me say this before if you've watched my Reddit or Twitter account, but I would like to go into more detail about things, explaining my thoughts. Those that know me know that I go into a lot of detail about everything. You may also know that I have a lot to say. I would like to explain this in a manner that gives others a fairly new perspective on the case. Those that are new, a chance to catch up. We all get new supporters constantly, supporters who may not be familiar with the case. They deserve to know the evidence, and that whatever type of evidence that may be out there that they're unaware of. I like to explain everything in extreme high detail, so bear with me, and let's take a stroll down memory lane.
Yeah. So let me just interject for 1 second, and I love that about you, and that's one of the reasons why I love to read your stuff, and I love to interact with you on Discord, and we have several different channels that we interact on, and the basis of the scientific method is hypothesize, observe, and then reinvestigate. And laying out all that detail, somebody can come back and say, oh, okay, well, that doesn't really match the facts. And then you can adjust. And unless you lay it out in that level of detail, you don't open up the ability to learn and morph that. And that's really one of the powerful ways that you do your research. Very often you get the crap beat out of you on places like Twitter, but it's all part of the learning process, right?
Right. I mean, I've had to go numerous times. I had to go back and change things around, or I might have got a detail here and there changed, you know what I mean? Because the more and more, like, as days goes by, we're always getting something new and discovering that things actually happen on a certain day.
Right.
We're creating a timeline that's pretty accurate. And sometimes we got to go back and change things around.
But I would point to the scientific method for that need, right? You have to hypothesize, and then when what you observe doesn't match your hypothesis, you have to go back and reevaluate your hypothesis. And there's no problem in my mind with that. Unless you have a crystal ball that's working a lot better than anybody else's, how are you supposed to do that? And just thinking about the level of detail that you think of things in is really illuminating, has led me to some other sort of discovery. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say that to people because I know you took a lot of black and blue marks in one of your recent Twitter posts, and I'm here to defend I'm here to defend the way that you think about things. So with that, have at it.
Yes, I've been beat up pretty good, but it's all right. It's all right. I believe in order for Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office to have planted traces 99 Toyota RAV4 on Avery's property, Ellie would have needed to have possession of it. They would have had to have possession.
Ellie, law enforcement.
Yes. Well, I'll say law enforcement, yes. Law enforcement would have had to have possession of it before November 5th. in order to understand how they acquired the RAV4, you have to go back, which doesn't require you to go back that long, only a couple of days prior to November 3rd, 2005. Now, has been speculated against and debated for years, understanding when and how. That's the easier part. I'm not going to show you how it's theoretically possible, but I'm going to show you how it can be achieved successfully. I believe there is sufficient supporting evidence that, to suspect that law enforcement created the crime scene at Avery's property. Therefore, the evidence collected would have had to have been created then as well. They planted on the Avery's property to find it at a later date and time. I also believe that there's supporting evidence that exists, which law enforcement discovered evidence much earlier than reported at a separate location, other than what they led us to believe in the Manitowoc gravel pit. It held significant evidence of a possible murder, did it not? It had bones in the property. The quarry also had bones in the property.
So could we take a step back for a second, Ben, and let me see if I can digest what you've said so far.
Yes.
So with regard to the RAV being in law enforcement custody before the 5th, don't we have a document from Manitowoc County that says they took a dark green RAV4 into custody, into evidence on the 3rd? Don't we have that piece of paper that says that?
Yes. It's also on multiple documents, just not one.
How do the guilters explain that? Where did that come from? You know, did aliens and space aliens bring it, Michael Griesbach? How did it get there? Where is this an accident? Because inevitably, as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, the RAV was taken into custody at Calumet, not Manitowoc. So why should Manitowoc have this document that says they took the RAV in, and why should it be cited in multiple places, as you suggest?
Their excuse, if you will, they basically claim that it's a typo, whether it's on
typo,
typo, or if it was on human error. I don't know if it was done on human error, but I just can't see something like this being possible. If a report exists, it exists for a reason. You know, I just can't see how it's that anyone can excuse that away.
Right, and with regard to things happening, excuse me, I'm choking.
Well, and it generated other documents too, right? Because there's more than one.
Right. Yeah, I think there's like 3 documents that I've witnessed that it has it on there as a seizure report, and one of them is I believe it had all the items listed down. The item list.
Oh, the camera. Yep.
Yes. And another one, I think it had other members of the Avery family on it, but it also had a seizure report down on there too, listed as the 3rd. But yes.
So and with regard to this other location, are you specifically talking about Cuss Road, or are you talking? Is it broader?
Yeah, I believe it's much broader. Not just,
okay, great. Okay, that's where you were going when I interrupted you. So keep going.
One actually could build a case, create an even present or strong circumstantial case against law enforcement and the state, basically by doing exactly the same thing that the state and law enforcement did, even by using the same evidence the state and law enforcement used to convict Avery. All you need to do is look at it all in a different light. Let's say law enforcement actually discovered evidence of traces, burnt charred remains at the Manitowoc gravel pit much earlier than they claim. If the evidence was planted, then there is no telling when they discovered it. How about giving them a time frame and benefit the benefit of a doubt. Let's make.
So when do you think that is the earliest that they could have discovered it?
I wanted to get into when Teresa, his mother's had contacted law enforcement, because she says that she contacted law enforcement and said that her daughter was missing on November 3rd, I believe. It was November
Correct.
3rd, right?
Yep.
And it was at 2:52. And I think in some states, I know in some states that they tell you to wait 24 to 48 hours before you can file a missing persons report.
Right.
And had she done that, or anybody in the family had reported her missing, they would have been forced to maybe come back at a later date, give it time to see if she might return or be found. There's certain reasons why they do that, unless there's like very unusual circumstances, which.
Well, she would have met that requirement, right? Being gone since the 31st. So she's been gone the 31st of the 1st, the 1st of the 2nd, the 2nd to the 3rd, right?
Right. So yeah, I mean, if they did report her much earlier than what they said, even when she had reported on the 3rd, it could have been on the 1st or the 2nd, and law enforcement might have already been aware or had knowledge that she was missing at the time, and might have, been looking for her vehicle or for, any trace of her prior.
I think
when they started.
I think Meyer did have something like that in one of her videos too. Am I right about that, Meyer? Karen Hallback kind of makes a slip of the tongue and says, when I didn't hear from her that last couple of days, those last 2 days or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what she says. It was actually the interview that was done on the 4th. And she said, it's just really weird that we haven't heard from her since, for the last 2 days. I mean, she literally says it on the 4th. That would put that on the 2nd, which is when the original flyer was posted.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. So sorry, Ben, to interrupt, but I'm just trying to bring the context of this large group together. So please continue.
Had they found the burnt charter remains, say, on the 2nd of November and not the 8th, they would have had strong motive to keep this information withheld from reaching the media as well as the public. They likely would have kept this information private due to the fact that had they discovered the remains of a charred body on November 2nd, if they knew that she was at Avery's, they might not want that information released. If they didn't know whose remains it was at the time that they found them, that's another good reason to keep it withheld, until they figure out what was going on. They shouldn't have yet knew who the remains belonged to, because they would have had no way of knowing yet who the remains belonged to. Had it been November 2nd, because Karen Hallbach calls and reports on the 3rd that her daughter's missing. If Manitowoc or Calumet or just law enforcement in general, if they're contending that they didn't know anything about Teresa's disappearance November 3rd, well, then that would mean that they wouldn't have known who the body belonged to had they found it prior to November 3rd. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. And I say, well, that's because Karen Hallbach hadn't yet reported her. It's quite possible that Karen or other members of the family reported Teresa a lot earlier, depending on, and I go into some states, Karen didn't report Teresa till 2/52/11/3/05. We have no way of knowing if anyone else had reported her missing prior to November 3rd. Oftentimes, you may hear that police can act on a missing person case if the person is missing, has to be missing for a certain time period. Some states give 24 to 48 hours. That doesn't mean that she can't be reported, but until it's actually filed and acted on. You know, I mean, it has to first be filed and then they act on it.
Right. I think that what's needed to do some initial action, like, or some right away action for an adult, is that the situation has to be exigent, and that's a word that they'll use on some subpoenas, which means that for some reason they think that her life is in immediate danger. For example, if she had a medical condition, she wasn't getting her meds or some such. Some condition, and that's the word that you see tossed around is exigent.
I mean, police could have said a number of different things. You know, I mean, she was over the age of 18, and which she's an adult and has every right not to be found. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. Maybe she's with someone else, a friend, a boyfriend, and possibly just wanted to get away for a bit. Maybe she had left town or took a vacation to clear her head and relax. Any of these could have easily been said. Instead of having family just jumping to conclusions, if they truly didn't know the circumstances yet surrounding their loved one's disappearance, police usually just don't act on these cases unless very unusual circumstances present itself. Time is always considered before jumping the gun.
Not in that time frame, that's for sure. Absolutely, you're absolutely right about.
However, documents, reports, and records submitted to the FBI on November 3rd, 2005 suggest that Ellie was already aware of Teresa's disappearance. This is what we were just talking about. I'm sorry, because I kind of like go and it's hard for you guys to know what I'm getting ready to say because you guys are already talking about things that I haven't got to yet. You know what I mean? So I apologize. Ellie wasn't already aware of Teresa's disappearance, as well as having knowledge of her demise by November 3rd, 2005. How can this be? Supposedly, she wasn't discovered by November 8th, 2005, but these documents contradict the state's claim, as they already had her listed on the reports filed that she was deceased and that her manner of death was listed as a homicide. This meant that Teresa was murdered and that they, meaning law enforcement, already possessed this knowledge and that they were now on the search for a killer, the killer of a now deceased Teresa Halbach. Law enforcement by this time already zeroed in on a suspect, which is also listed in a report submitted and handed over to the FBI. A pre-notion of a potential suspect named by none other than Stephen Avery. So at this time, by November 3rd, law enforcement subsequently already had discovered Teresa's remains, manner of death, and a suspect. A suspect who had already been framed by the same department investigating the case and who ultimately seek to have him falsely charged, deceitfully tried, and wrongfully convicted, in which he served 18 years for a crime he didn't commit.
What a shock that they should identify him, right? I mean, of all the people in the universe, wow, she's gone missing. It's got to be Stephen.
I would like to articulate here that at the exact time when Karen Halbach reported her daughter missing, law enforcement put two and two together, realizing this very moment that the body that they had recently discovered the day before at the Manitowoc gravel pit possibly belonged to that of the missing woman, Teresa Halbach. That's if they found her on the 2nd. Now on to acquiring the RAV. Supposedly on Thursday, November 4th, 2005, midday, Kevin Remlo was at the Cenex gas station in Mishicot, but that's how they had it listed down in the report. Remlo sees a missing poster flyer in the window, notices something that caught his attention. He notices an officer in uniform. That officer is Andrew Colburn, who happens to be present at the at the same exact time Ramlo is at the Cinex gas station, Colburn approached by Kevin Remlo. Remlo told Colburn that he recognizes the vehicle in the missing person's flyer and that it belongs to Teresa Hallbach, the missing person in the flyer. He was quite certain that it was the same vehicle.
Do we happen to know whether the missing person vehicle, the missing person poster at the Cinex station was a color picture, and whether it had the green RAV on there? It must have had the RAV on there, but there were some black and whites, I know. Do you happen to know whether it was color?
I don't believe it was colored.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Ramlo is a person of extreme consequence here, because Kathleen Zellner has his affidavit and has used his affidavit to insinuate that Kevin Ramlo was responsible for the actual discovery of the RAV, right? And I'm not sure how much I believe that in truth. I think there were several people who reported the RAV at the turnaround there, including a woman named Jill Stein, including Robert Fabian. Could have been any number of people.
I think like 5 people or 4 at least.
You're right. So they
there's a number of people.
Yeah.
There's a total of where are we at? Are we at the 147?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's convenient for Zellner's narrative that it's Kevin Ramlo, but it could have been any one of those people, and there are people before him.
Yes, there was a total of 9 eyewitnesses, I believe, that claimed to have seen the green Toyota at this exact spot on the 147. There was Kevin Remlo, Irving Konecki, Jill Rain, Robert Fabian, John Warren, Barb Linsmeyer. Bobby Dassey doesn't quite put her there, but he says that he did mention before she was on traveling and left Avery's property, so heading in.
Yeah. Maya, did you have a question for OB1?
Well, actually, we'd brought up Kathleen Zellner's about how she brings up Ramlo. And I think the important part of why she's using Ramlo is because if Colburn did find that car on the 3rd and Ramlo told him on the 4th that he saw it, then that shows that Colburn already knew, and that would be why he didn't make a report about it. I think that's the significance of her using Ramlo's statement over anybody else.
Right. That's typical of Colburn, that he has no report on it, no report on anything. You know who else doesn't have a report on anything is Jacobs, right? And Jacobs actually has the nerve to come out and say, well, we were excluded from the investigation. This is Calumet's job to write the reports. That's what Jacobs said.
I actually put Colburn on the list as certain people that may have seen the RAV4 on the 147. I mean, they claim that there was a vehicle on the 147, don't they? They said that it was a vehicle that wasn't Teresa's or had busted a hole in the windshield.
I don't know if they copped to the windshield, but they do cop to there being a SUV there that wasn't hers.
Correct.
Yeah, I haven't seen that report, BB. If you
I sent that report.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Get service with a smile around here on the Fall Play Discord channel. Okay, Ben, keep going.
Well, I placed Andrew Colburn on the list because he claims to have seen a RAV4, but not belonging to Teresa. The vehicle had sustained damage to the windshield and the side driver's side door, but it doesn't say that the window was like busted out. It just said that it had a hole in the windshield and a hole in the driver's side door. But it seemed to be abandoned as well. No further information was given about this particular vehicle. No plate call in. Wasn't called in to be towed that we knew of at that time. But now we know that there was a tow truck service that was contacted the night of November 3rd and early morning hours of November 4th.
Now let me guess, Ben. You're not going to tell me that this person who did the towing was actually the fire chief in his other job, are you? It wasn't the same guy who towed the blue RAV4 off the Avery salvage yard, was it?
Absolutely, it was him.
Paul Rabbis, I think his name is, if I'm not mistaken.
Of course. Who else?
And he was contacted.
Who else?
He
At
wears
12
many hats.
12:57 midnight. And what better time to tow a vehicle than after midnight in a rural area where less traffic would be seen? It would be
everybody's
under the cover
in bed.
Yes, and everybody's sleeping.
And what better guy to do it than somebody who's already on the payroll, right?
According to Detective Dietering's report, Dietering filed a report stating that Kevin Remlo was listed as seeing Andrew Colburn at the Cynics gas station on Thursday, November 4th, 2005. Also stating that Remlo saw Trace's vehicle by the 147 turnaround on Thursday, November 2005. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, it was Thursday, yes. Thursday, November 4th, 2005. Thursday wasn't the 4th. Thursday was the 3rd. November 3rd, 2005.
That's right. Friday was the 4th and Saturday was the 5th, because that's the day that Pam of God, they have the search on, they have the big search on a Saturday. That's what working people have the day off on Saturday, right?
Yep. So there's something wrong here with these reports. And there's a huge issue in Dietering's report. It's an error, as the state always claims that this discrepancy here within the date, Andrew Colburn wasn't working on November 4th, 2005. He was working on Thursday, November 3rd, 2005. So this means that this incident couldn't have taken place on November 4th, 2005, which would have been Friday. This date will later again contradict another witness report filed by Detective John Dietering. The report statement belonging to that of Irvin Konecki. In Dietering's report, he claims that Irvin also seen the RAV4 at the same turnaround, 147. Now get this, Thursday, November 4th, 2005. You guessed it.
Who is Irvin? Do we know who Irvin is? Is he just some Joe Blow that happened to see it on the street and called it in? Or is he got any ties that we know about?
Irvin Konecki happens to be friend with Scott Tydick.
Oh, I did not know that. That's interesting.
Is it Kevin Ramlow also friends with Steve Tyler?
Or is it Remlo or is it Konecki? I thought it was Konecki.
Well, Ramlow sent a text to Scott that said, "Hey,
all right,
I saw
yes,
this."
yeah. Then maybe Konecki isn't related, or you know, what I mean, friends or I might have got that one wrong.
Gotcha.
I might have made a mistake there. I don't know. Does anybody have any information on Konecki?
Not me, no. I was just curious if you. Very often when I ask you these questions, you come out with some amazing information that I've never heard. So I was just kind of, grasping at a straw there.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Might be why he's not in his friends list.
Ask and you shall receive.
Exactly.
Now, I wanted to talk about the issue with the way that Dietering made these reports. It was in the same exact way Dietering did to Kevin Remlo's statement, what he did with Irvin Konecki's. What I believe happened here was too much time had passed. It took Dietering over a year to file these reports and follow up on these witnesses who's been waiting all this time to speak with detectives. In some cases, he really never even followed up on most of these witnesses. A year, can you imagine? I mean, you could forget a lot in a year.
I'm sitting here shocked that that it took that long to get some of the witnesses. Is anybody else sharing my shock?
No, oh, not at all. I mean, you got to think it only took like 8 years to make the call or the statement that he received a phone call in prison that Stephen was the wrong guy for the rape of Penny Bernstein. So, in all actuality, 1 year is actually pretty
That's
fast.
1/8 of that time. That's like 12.5% of the time. Yeah. That's
blindingly fast.
Yeah. Cover your eyes. You don't want the heat from the movement to, ruin your retina.
With each passing month, your recollection of the incident begins to slowly fade away. These witnesses didn't forget what they seen, but I believe they got confused of the date as well as when the incident had occurred. Dietering may have purposely confused them on what day this actually took place, and probably for good reason. I believe Dietering intentionally altered these documents, the time, and it basically altered their perception, as well as altered the dates as these statements were reported. So if you're looking at Irvin Konecki and you're looking at Kevin Rumlow, and they believe that the date that they seen it was Thursday, and you have Dietering change these, and the next time he speaks with them, he's trying to tell them, no, I believe that you got the date wrong. I think it was on Friday and it wasn't Thursday. Yeah, I mean, because we have the date down as Thursday, November 4th, when, Friday. So they begin to I don't know, they get confused as to when these incidences had occurred, and I do believe that they happened on the 4th, or not the 4th, the 3rd, and not the 4th.
Yeah. I mean, certainly you're not going to get anybody on this call to challenge you on the fact that the reporters of certain information could have very easily deliberately wrote down the wrong dates. They could have done it by accident and it could have been a typo.
You can send them over to Making a Murderer Reddit, and I'm sure somebody would try to disprove them there.
Oh, yeah. But they're
I
not
think
on
that
this
already
call.
happened to him.
That happens every day.
Yeah.
But this is an issue because what it does is it confuses them, and then their account of what happened actually becomes uncredible. They don't, like the jury, if they're looking at this, it just seems uncredible, less credible to them to believe what day this was. So their account of what they seen and what they witnessed is unreliable to be used.
Yeah, I think most people who are right thinking, if I went, if I had seen something, let's say not in this case, but in any case, and I went to the police station and told them something, and they had come back to my house to see if I had any deeper recollection. If they had told me, that I said at that time a certain thing, I'd believe their representation of the facts. I think because why would they lie about it? And certainly what I said at that time is going to be more reliable than what I recollect. Now I wouldn't unless we're talking about the Salem witch trials, I wouldn't want to I'd want to go with my most fresh recollection.
And the timing was just perfect, you know what I mean? Because it was right before Avery's trial. They waited that long to alter their perception. That way, yeah, I mean, if they would have done that a year before and not waited that year to follow up, I mean, the account would have been more reliable because it would have been fresher in their memory to recall these certain events,
Well, they had the right guy, Ben. You got to understand this. They had the right guy, and none of that seeing the Rav on 147 helped implicate the guy that they already had. So, if they were lucky they didn't wait another 5 years, never mind just one.
Right. So now that we cleared that up and corrected date as when this incident had occurred, we can get back to Kevin Rumlow. So on the corrected date, Thursday, November 3rd, 2005, Rumlow told Colborne that told him what he saw. No sooner did this interaction come to a close, Andrew Colburn contacted dispatch, but not by standard protocol. Instead, Colburn uses a standard police issue radio. What happens? He contacts dispatch using his personal private cell phone, which I might add is definitely against protocols and procedures. Here's the gist of the call. Dispatch Lynn, what can I do for you, Andy? Colburn, can you run Sam William Henry 582, dispatcher? Comes back to a missing person, shows it's Teresa M. Hallbach. Colburn, okay, 99 Toyota. Dispatch Lynn, yep, Colburn, okay, thanks. Question, why would Colburn call in that license plate call? And what was he looking at what was he looking at when he called it in? I mean, why would you call it?
I bet he was standing right there next to it.
Talk about people who've changed their statements, right? At trial and even later, he said, well, I don't even remember making that call in the first place, right? And then when he typed something up for his boss, after Making a Murderer came out, he had a very specific recollection of exactly why he made that call. And it was, he made those calls very frequently to get it into his mind, right? That's kind of what he said later. But yet another example of the amazing changing stories that happened in this case.
Well, he also says in that lawsuit that they took an answer from a different spot in the tape and submitted it instead of his real answer.
Hey, you're talking about the Netflix, his lawsuit
minute.
against Netflix, so, right? So we'd be clear about that.
Yeah.
Is he implicating anyone about editing these tapes? Oh, he's blaming it on the Netflix.
Laura and
yeah, whatever.
yeah,
Okay.
Jane,
Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't
whatever
mean
the
to
two
interrupt.
women's name is from Making a Murderer and
Right.
Netflix. Yeah, he blamed.
But wait,
Maura.
I think we
Creative-
understand who the
Creative
real
editing.
editor of most of this stuff was, don't we? I mean, after all, he
Oh,
did get a
yeah.
job for the Green Bay Packers now, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, creative editing is what Kratzoy states that MaM used creative editing.
Yeah, well, I always wondered whether or not if the Netflix lawsuit were to proceed, if that would make Colburn's cell phone records eligible for discovery as part of that lawsuit.
Oh God, I hope so.
Zellner was
Wouldn't that be nice?
fulfilled and considered it a Christmas present that he had filed that lawsuit.
The only reason I can think of her saying that is what I just said is that if his cell phone records were that made them eligible for discovery. Well, if you're going to accuse us of painting that you lied, let's prove that you told the truth. Let's have your cell phone records from that day. I think Zelda
Yeah,
would be
she
all
said
over
she'd love to see him disposed in that and that. Yeah,
that. Yeah, that'd be
that
awesome.
It's like a Christmas present to her, and that's a good thing. Yay! Yeah, she was whimsical about it.
Yeah. She's all over him. The Coburn Challenge, that was a riot. Come to my office. I got a cabinet just like the one you shook. Show me how you shook the key out of it and where it might have been hidden in this cabinet that was searched 7 times.
I love how much she just straightforwardly comes through and challenges every single one of them to come to her.
Yeah, it's outright mockery, right? It's just it really just shows her disdain for their story. The fact that she mocks them openly to their faces.
Well, it's not just that, but I mean, if you pay attention to most of her other tweets, you'll note she stated, I don't think she's ever run into this much resistance from any case that she's tried. I think this is the one that, all the way up to the state level is clearly giving her the runaround at every single possible turn.
Yeah, she says other sides, sometimes other places, prosecutors will even work with her and help her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because they want to be sure that they got it right.
It's good to know that there's still a good component of the country really interested in justice.
That's no joke.
Sorry, Ben, we digress. We're never going to let you finish because you keep on bringing up these great things for us to go down these rabbit holes on.
So the question remains unanswered to this day. It's been the center of controversy and completely shrouded in mystery, but I just may have the answer to solving this riddle.
Okay, before you go on, the question, you talk about the question of what that call was about. Can you restate the question for the listeners?
The question is what was he looking at when he called it in, and why would Andrew call in that license plate, like from his personal number?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Not the standard issued radio. The answer had Andrew Colburn wanted to keep this information private, assuming any eyewitnesses would have been present, assuming he didn't want anyone knowing that this vehicle really belonged to Teresa Halbach. Andrew Colburn would have had to been extremely careful. He knew that he had no choice but to call in the plates. And if there were any eyewitnesses standing by or any other bystanders wondering if this was the missing woman's RAV4, using his standard issue police radio, it could have been heard by anybody standing by. Like if he would have contacted Lynn by using his standard issue radio, anybody in a radius of him would have been able to hear the plate come back to a missing person. So therefore they would have known that that was actually Teresa's vehicle, and this whole entire facade that they were trying to pull off or charade wasn't going to work. You know what I mean? Because then there would have been witnesses, loose ends. Also, the call would have been broadcasted over the airways, hitting many police scanner CBs and other forms of radio casting off the same frequency. Lynn's response, it comes back to a missing person, a Teresa M. Halbach, would have possibly been heard by everybody. It could have certainly and would have been loud enough for anyone to hear standing by. The reverb would have been noticeable to anyone standing in a couple feet radius. To muffle and silence the sound, Andrew Colburn decided to use his cell phone, opposed to using the standard issued radio. By eliminating any risk of exposing who the vehicle actually belonged to, while being able to make it look legit to everyone standing around him that the plates didn't belong to Teresa Halbach. But none of them...
I agree.
But none of them knew if it was actually hers or not, unless they would have had the flyer with them or had a photographic memory. Had the information got out that Andy was lying about the RAV4, it surely would have jeopardized law enforcement's plans to possibly plant the RAV4, especially in the event they discovered Teresa's remains prior to November 3rd, 2005.
I have a question for you, Obi.
Mm-hmm.
If he was standing around somebody, do you think a possibility that that person remembers that, or those people may remember that phone call and may have heard it on Making a Murder? Do you think that these people would be willing to come forward and talk about this, or do you think that whoever he was around is somebody who's just as much wrapped up in this as he is?
Actually, I believe that there was. I believe that there was a person standing by, and I believe that that person was Irvin Konecki. Because when Irvin Konecki, it's kind of weird how Dietering writes his report, because it's kind of manipulative in a way. And he says that Irvin mentioned he's seen an unlit unit when he drove up upon the 147. An unlit unit, a normal person like you or I, or we don't really refer to vehicles as unlit units. The only vehicle that we refer to as an unlit unit would be a police cruiser or a police vehicle without its flashers flashing on the side of a road. That would be an unlit unit to one of us. You know what I mean? So I believe that how it's worded, I believe that in the report, Dietering alters and change that report away to best suit him or conform to what he's trying to portray Irvin Konecki saying, you know.
That makes perfect sense.
And Irvin Konecki also says that he's seen a hole in the windshield and a hole in the driver's side door. And now, if he's driving down a vehicle or in a vehicle driving down the road, and this time frame, it most likely would have been dark outside, you know. For him to have such detail as to see a hole in the windshield or a hole in the door, that tells me that he was up close in person with this vehicle, meaning that he would have been standing damn near next to the vehicle to have seen these details. You know, I mean, I just don't see how he would be able to see them driving down the road. And from my recollection, I don't recall that the vehicle was facing east or west. I think it was pulled in facing the berm, or I mean the tree line, or that road. Like it kind of like pulled straight directly in, and like the ass end of the vehicle would have been facing the road.
Right, yeah, the front nose of it would have been pointing in towards the tree lining by the river there.
Yes. So it kind of makes me feel like he was there, like he was present and witnessed this with his own eyes. You know what I mean? Like he was directly there. And the account that Dietering, you know what I mean, provides, it doesn't fit what he wrote in that report. It just doesn't.
Well, I'm very much waiting for Millbilly's timeline. I know he's working on his timeline video where he discusses the whereabouts. You know, he's tracing the whereabouts of the Colburns and the Jacobs and the Lynx based on the cross communication between the Manitowoc and Calumet dispatch.
Mm-hmm.
At least the Calumet's timestamp, so he has an idea of you know, who is what when based on the things that you can mutually hear on both of the calls. And I think we're going to get some very, very illuminating information from Millbilly on that topic. And I'd love to know who, you know, when he's asked, when Colburn is asked if he got any information back on that report, that the license plate run, and he says negative, you know, who he was talking to, what time that happened. All that is you know, buried in you know, piece of information that yet again we don't have.
Yeah, that'll be pretty amazing to hear.
Absolutely.
Not only is it fortunate and what do I want to say? Unfortunate and that inconvenient for law enforcement that Dietering waited a year to follow up on these reports, but it's also unfortunate and convenient for law enforcement that Irvin Konecki has now passed away. You know, so it's not like we can go back and know exactly which direction this RAV4 was facing.
Well, I'd say this information's more fortunate for the police than it is for us.
Right.
I'd say you're right about that too, Myers. So if people want, I'm sure I'm sure they can find this. You know, we know you're taking this from your recent Reddit post, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great. So if you want to find a more detailed version of this, look up OB1 on Reddit.
Well, there's definitely a lot of other things that I got to add into it because I'm going to explain the newer things that I've realized, you know what I mean, since I've made this.
Yeah, we should get to those.
So it says, police might have not known at the time who was discovered had they found burnt charred remains at an undisclosed location much earlier than what they said they did, a location such as the Manitowoc gravel pit. All Andy would have had to do was tell everyone that this RAV4 wasn't Teresa's and that it belonged to someone else. Who would have questioned it? Remember, police claim that the bones were discovered on November 8th, 2005 in Avery's burn pit. But It could have been much earlier than originally stated. Now, no sooner after this call, the plate call, is when I believe that the abandoned vehicle at the 147 turnaround was actually towed and seized by Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office. Teresa Hallbox, RAV4. RAV4, reports filed showed Teresa's RAV4 being seized the night of November 3rd, 2005. The state and law enforcement claimed that the date was due to error. I do not accept that at all. To me, that's nothing more than an excuse to explain away the report. Two separate reports. The summary report case number 2005-0008-844 and an incident report ICA 03009213, which clearly
I wish they could explain to me the nature of that error. Like somebody sat down on the 3rd and actually typed in, "Oh yeah, we found this vehicle. I'm going to make it up. I found a green RAV4, San William Henry 582." And they got that out of nowhere? Did these people know CAF or something? How is it that they came upon this information to accidentally type in on the 3rd of November? I don't understand the nature of this error.
They also have a report that Colburn entered into the CAD system, which I believe that it was deleted. I mean, the report number still exists, but the information in there isn't something that we can get or like FOIA. I believe that.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a surprise?
Right. The problem with this is no other report of Teresa's RAV4 seized as property exists for November 5th. So there was no report filed for the 5th. Everything else was prior, and that would have been prior to Pam actually finding the RAV4 on the 5th. How come a seizure report was never filed on this date, November 5th, when it was towed off the Avery property? Do you recall a report or anything ever being mentioned of?
I don't know. That's a good point. You'd think that it has an evidence tag, right? The RAV is actually a piece of evidence A, if I'm not mistaken, right? That's why the blood on the blood on the back of the RAV is A23. I thought the RAV was listed as Exhibit A. Maybe I'm wrong about that. There must be a piece of.
I'm pretty sure that there is. It has a tag on the front windshield under the wiper or something at one point, and I'm pretty sure it is. Right. It's like the first piece of evidence found, right? So yeah, why not A? Yeah.
But I do like questions and answers in this thread. And one of them is do you remember when I asked when Detective Dietering would change the date and that I had an answer and that I would explain later? Well, this is the answer.
All right, let's have it.
Dietering and Colburn knew that they needed to separate the two incidences from each other. Those two incidences were Remlo's interaction with Colburn and the date, and Irvin Konicke's interaction with his statement as to witnessing the 147 RAV4. They needed to separate the date due to the seizure report filed. With everything happening all on Thursday, November 3rd, 2005, every event basically creates a timeline, corroborating and tying everything together. This discrepancy or bullshit error was an excuse to break up the witness statements opposed to what took place on the correct date. It basically offset everything to the point to where witness statements contradict Andy's work schedule. But in fact, everything was correct, but the date. due to Dietering's altering it and throwing everything off. Getting back to Andrew Colburn, had Teresa been reported as missing by mother Karen Hallbach, and flyers were already passed out into the community, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office should have already been given copies of the flyer that a missing person, that the missing persons flyer would have already been passed out throughout the department, and every cop would have or should have had a copy with them, meaning that Colburn should have already had a copy of Teresa's missing persons flyer. Yeah, I mean, if they,
I think they were delivered by Ryan Hilligans, if I'm not mistaken.
right. So for Andrew to say he didn't have that information when he called in the plates, of course he had to have that information of a missing person. That all the information needed about Teresa and her RAV4 is presented on Teresa's missing persons flyer. So why would Colburn need to call in the plate? It was hanging in the window at the Cinex gas station when Remlo had his interaction with him. The year, make, model would have been all visible, including Teresa's license plate, the Sam William Henry. He also would have known it came back to Teresa Hallbach, the missing woman, who was already reported earlier that same day. There would have been no reason for Andrew Colburn to call Teresa's license plate in unless he was staring right at it. I mean, he's the one that made the call. Besides, had it been someone else's vehicle, you would have heard a completely different set of plates. It's that simple. I have no doubt that it was Teresa's vehicle that Andrew Colburn was looking at that night. Now,
what do you make, Ben, of the, in Zellner's recent filing? She very much like in the Ripper Jack gaming video, she says, Zellner says that she hired an audio expert to clarify the tape, and she says that the audio expert says that somebody says it's her car or the car's here or some such.
Right.
Do you believe? I mean, that voice that I heard from Ripperjack, that sounded like a female voice to me. I'm not prepared to say it's Pam of God, like Ripperjack Gaming said. It sounded female to me. Do you think that that was Irvin Konecki? Or do you think that there was probably multiple people there?
I think that there was multiple people there. And at one point in time, I did think that it was Pam, but I've had the pleasure of talking with multiple women there in Wisconsin, and they all have a distinct way of speaking. And if you heard them over a dispatch or, a phone call or something like that, they kind of do sound similar, and I could see that it would be possibly someone else. But
if it was BB there, if it was BB, we'd have to bleep it out, right?
Hey, I potentially resemble that comment.
Yes, you do. You do. Because I've listened to you say car before, and it sounds quite similar to what's on that tape.
I think it's the other colorful metaphors that
I'm a transplant, though. I'm not from here. I'm a transplant. I'm not from here.
Now we know how Andrew got Teresa's RAV4, and it remained under the possession of corrupt, deceitful officers within the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office. Only a select few of this knew this information. I'm not going to speculate the entire department knew, but only a handful of police did, as well as certain members over at CASO. A secret is not a secret if everyone knows the truth. The less people there are, the better off that it will remain a secret. The more people that know, the greater risk of the secret being exposed or even leaked. I wanted to get into the operation of Blindside Avery, and this is sneaking the RAV4 onto the Avery. So if the vehicle was discovered and seized on November 3rd, 2005, how was it found on November 5th, 2005 by Pam? Sturm's God Almighty? That's a question I might add. I could tell you how the vehicle got on Avery's property, and all it took was a change of plan. Remember that classic line from Making a Murderer? The change of plans. I remember hearing this while watching Making a Murderer. It was a call where I think Wiegert says the boss wants us to go back down to Avery's and re-interview him again, which means that they were already there, present that day, and that they went back down to Stevens' trailer and searched his trailer later on in the evening. But they were already present there one time that day, which was the morning hours. And I believe that was when they were there to interview Chuck. And they seen Chuck in the salvage yard and asked him if he didn't mind if they looked around, which Chuck, said, yeah. Steven came up in a golf cart and was wondering what was going on. I don't know what all he said, but I do remember reading that in a report. They later came back that night. Law enforcement came back to the salvage yard and went to Avery's residence to re-interview him. Why? Because they wanted to not only search inside his trailer, law enforcement wanted the Avery's attention fixated on them as they searched around. They knew that Avery and his family would have been watching their every move while they were searching the trailer. This way, it made sure that nobody was watching the yard. Their attention wouldn't have been on the yard. Their attention would have been on law enforcement. The problem with that is with nobody watching the yard, it gave them the opportunity for other law enforcement to sneak, Trace's RAV4 onto the property. In my eyes, the change of plans was to create a diversion to plant the RAV4 while investigators searched inside to draw everyone's attention away from the yard.
And there's a whole bunch of stuff like that that's going on there, right? I mean, it's really like a chess game that they're playing, right? If you could argue that Cusroy was a distraction to plant stuff in the burn barrels, or you could argue that there's really a chess game going on, and that that they're coordinating multiple activities at the same time, and while the attention's on Cuss Road, then things are happening elsewhere.
Right.
But these things are happening on Cuss Road are important, right? It's not a complete distraction. That's part of an overall strategy. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that you could argue that's happening there. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, something definitely was going on at Cuss Road. There's no way that they would have that many officers over there on multiple days searching, moving things around in and out of that area. Something happened over there.
Thematically, it's the same thing, though, right? You're arguing that right. They're doing one thing over here where that has the attention, so they can do something underhanded somewhere else, and that's just seems to be thematic of the whole case around here.
Yes, yeah. So with nobody watching the yard, it did give them a very good opportunity. But they weren't aware that other people were actually watching. Chuck was actually watching. And Chuck actually contacts Steven at around 8 o'clock and tells him that he sees headlights over back by him. In fact, he talks about it that same exact night that he was searched by law enforcement after they had left. The media had came over to Avery's property to interview him, which they were there several days in a row, interviewing him almost every night.
So if you could remind people of the day that happened, I think there's a whole bunch of things with regard to those lights.
Yes,
there's one night where they see headlights. They see headlights one night, taillights another night.
Yes, there was two separate days. The one on Menards where Steven saw headlights down by his property was the
Tail light,
November
Steven Stone.
3rd.
Sorry, right?
Yes, tail lights was November 3rd. The incident where Chuck sees them is November 4th. And this was around the same exact time that Steven's trailer is being searched by law enforcement. When law enforcement leaves the property, Chuck contacts Steven and says that he sees headlights back by him. So Steven goes with Bobby in a truck, and he goes back by that pond area in the I want to say southwest part of the property. And he doesn't see anything, but he's not as far back as to where Trace's
the
vehicle.
was actually.
No.
Yeah. And so I'd like to interject here for 1 second and say that, if people think that, this is something that was invented well after the fact, you can listen to the jail calls and hear Steven talking about this event. You can listen to the interviews, the early interviews with Chuck Avery, where he talks about that on the 9th of November. Obviously, but this is before Steven has been arrested, or contemporaneously with Steven getting arrested. These stories were not coordinated, or made up after the fact. This is the live, sort of the first chance interview that they have. It's not to me, they're very credible.
Well, this isn't just several days later either. When Avery mentions this, it's not like several days went past in his recollection of the incident. Kind of like manipulates or changes direction. It's the same thing that he speaks of each time, So this day on November 4th, after he's searched, he's already recalling it to the media and saying that this is what happened this night, right before you guys got here. I was being searched, and my brother contacted me and said that he's seeing headlights over back by him. If law enforcement is present on the property, who would be stupid enough to sneak a RAV4 onto the property and plant it, knowing that officers are already present on the property? It just don't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for anyone else to have done it. Then who?
Other officers.
Exactly.
Officers.
So I think, it does give a lot of credibility to Steven's account of what happened. On several days, even when he's telling officers he's seeing those headlights, what day they were. Obviously, there were several days. Two incidences where he's seen headlights, and the timing of it just screams law enforcement. And there was also a William Siebert. He also said that he saw two separate vehicles coming down Jambo Creek Road, and entered the back end of Avery's property late in the evening of November 4th, 2005. Mr. Siebert noticed that two separate vehicles, a white SUV and a green SUV, that fit the exact description of Teresa's vehicle as it was portrayed in the news and in her missing posters flyer. As Siebert stated, the RAV4 resembled that of what he witnessed. Now, who else would have been driving down this road other than police officers? Or while officers are present at Avery's property searching it, much less drive onto the property. While you got the news media there. The time frame of this is just it wouldn't benefit Avery.
Didn't they try and tell the old dude that there was police in the area working that night too?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
I think you're cutting out, Ben. Can you repeat that?
Go ahead.
You started with the time frame of this.
Oh, the time frame. It's just it would be, it wouldn't be beneficial for Avery or anybody else in the family to be driving Teresa's RAV4 and planting it on his property while police are present. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the whole act. It doesn't. Right. Right. It's doubtful that it was one of the Averys, unless because it's not clear how they would set up Stephen. It's law enforcement that wants to set up Stephen.
Like I said, who would take the risk of driving a murdered woman's vehicle to successfully plant it on Avery's property while police are present on Avery's salvage yard? Who else would be driving down Jambo Creek Road while police are present at Avery's property? Unless it was law enforcement, because nobody else would take that risk. I know some people will say, well, law enforcement ain't going to take that risk of driving a murdered woman's vehicle or a missing person's vehicle. Well, why wouldn't they? Yeah, I mean, if they are...
Yeah, who's going to pull them over, right?
What's that?
Who's going to pull them over?
Right.
I think they would. I think they would. It would not be as risky as if it was somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's exactly Ben's point, right?
No other citizen is going to stop him and be like, hey, citizens arrest, you're driving this woman's... Nobody's going to do that. And a law enforcement, if it's law enforcement, then they already know that law enforcement's driving that vehicle, so they're not going to pull them over. So why wouldn't they drive that vehicle onto his property if they had the plan and intentions of framing him?
I always thought that they might have enlisted Ryan Hilligus to help them do that. Just for some reason that there's a lot of theories that go on, but any theory that you have has to explain how he got his hands on the day planner. And we know that she made notes on her day planner page on that day from Zellner's investigation. So law enforcement enlisting Ryan's help doing that is, why do I think Ryan? Well, he's the one who gave Pam of God the map. We haven't seen that map. That map is probably lost to history. But Pam says she got a map from Ryan. Obviously, it wasn't X marks the spot with the RAB, or nobody claimed that anyway, even though it might have been. So therefore, that would be one way that he would be able to have not killed her, been a participant with law enforcement, and got his hands on the day planner at the same time. So that's just an interesting, unfounded theory.
Well, and I agree with you. I think that he was all too willing to help. I mean, if he was around the area still out there when it was found, because you got to think in November, the sun goes down in Wisconsin at 4:35?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, especially around this time, yeah.
Yeah. So it's very reasonable that he would have been out there still around that time. It's not like it's super late at night. But if Andy called in after dark, we could even say it was at 6:00 and that still happened. So I would think Ryan would be all too willing to help, especially if he does have something to do with this and he wants to take the attention away from himself.
But on the midday, I mean, this was still daytime hours. I mean, I think there was still light, in the sky. But November 3rd, 2005, Mr. Siebert also recalled seeing a Manitowoc sheriff's office vehicle driving back down that same area. And if he's already there driving down that road one day, and then the very next day you see these two vehicles driving down that same road, I don't think that's a road that, Stephen Avery would be traveling, or Chuck. That's just not a normal area for them to be in, is it?
Well, I wasn't suggesting during the daytime. I was more thinking that Ryan was there at the nighttime. If the police were up front, as you stated, searching Avery's property to create a diversion, then they would need somebody back there to take care of the rest of it. So that would be why he lost so many calls if he was back there on the evening of the 4th.
I agree. Those last calls are really suspicious. I mean,
And
he acted so guilty.
Where he was when he made him.
Yeah, and when they questioned him and Mike, I mean, they just look guilty.
But
They
somehow
were
he
stumbling
manages,
all over each other.
somehow he manages to know, though, that the cell phone coverage is terrible on the Avery salvage yards, despite the fact that he's never been
Well,
there.
and weren't they also referred to as like unofficial police something at one point in time?
I think he was referred to as an untrained officer of the law or something like that, because I heard that term today on one of the things I was listening to, and it crossed my mind. I was like, what untrained officers?
Well, that midday on November 3rd, 2005, when William Siebert recalled seeing a Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office driving back there by that road, the only officer that I know of that was at Avery's property on November 3rd was 2005. You know what I mean? So that road goes to the back end of Avery's property. So if Andrew Colburn was present there that day, why would he be back there behind Avery's property taking the back way? You don't enter Avery's property through the back, you enter it through the front. So what was he doing back there? Because he's the only one that's basically placed there on Avery's property on November 3rd. Because I don't know any other officer that was there that day.
It's a good question.
This is William Siebert's account, you know. And then the very next day, you see those two vehicles running down that road. You know, it's just very, very odd why Colburn would be back in that direction trying to get onto Avery's property through the back way. It just doesn't, something's just off there. Unless he was there spotting it, you know what I mean, from the ground to look for another way onto Avery's property without being seen. And then you have them that night. You see Avery saying that he sees those headlights, and then that was also on the 3rd, and then the 4th, Chuck sees headlights back by him. I mean, when you look through people's accounts and their statements, I mean, they're basically planting or implicating law enforcement where these lights are being located and seen. You know, it just, to me, it kind of makes sense that it was law enforcement in these areas when they were witnessed being seen.
Yeah, one thing I found very interesting was one of the calls, one of the recently released calls. I actually listened to it today. Stephen talks to Earl Avery, and he says to Earl that the public defender was unwilling to pursue the law enforcement planting defense, and he was the public defender was all in on trying to accuse Earl Avery of being the.
Yeah.
So you know, the public, you know, there's the, you know, the close knit group of the government employee.
But I know, you know, I mean, Zellner, she says that law enforcement wasn't involved in the planting of evidence, but I don't believe that.
Zellner can say whatever she wants, right?
I know.
I wouldn't believe anything Zellner says from that perspective, because she can see, she's like law enforcement now. She's not gonna, when the evidentiary hearing comes around, she's not going to be held to that statement, right? So she might just be trying to throw some false breadcrumbs, because she in her recent filing, she was not shy of accusing Wiegert Fassbender of complete and total malfeasance regarding the swab, the groin swab of Stephen Avery, right? She said that the groin swab was taken, it wasn't ordered, and they took it in the other room and they supposedly threw it out, but they didn't. They did not throw it out, and they kept it and used it for the hood in place of the hood latch swab. She says that in her filing. She says it outright. There's no uncertain words that she used there. She accuses them of that level of malfeasance. So, if she can say whatever she wants on Twitter to sort of throw people off the scent.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, I think you're going to see a very strong move by her, arguing that most of this was law enforcement. That's my opinion.
So to sum this up, like I have no doubt that Andrew Colburn was in a part of, he was part of planting evidence. And I really think that there's strong supporting evidence to corroborate that. This means that if he helped plant the RAV4 and had her keys, if Andy had Teresa's keys and then planted them in the bed, then that means the bones as well as the bullet and everything else just can't be trusted. If law enforcement planted that RAV4, you would expect that they would have the keys to that vehicle. Therefore, they would have had the keys to plant in Avery's room. If they had the keys to plant,
it would also become fruit of the poison tree.
Right. So, in my eyes, I think that the way that the state built their case to convict Avery, I believe that you can take much of what they found and see it how it's laid out and build a case to unconvict him or to show that law enforcement actually did plant much of what we see as they claim as evidence,
Well, it's like I said before, I think in my mind, what we're trying to do is establish reasonable doubt. And there was certainly motive for them to do that. And so if we asked about the things that they need to declare a Denny suspect, means, motive, and opportunity, they had all of those, right? And some of those guys had a very strong motive because they were personally implicated in some pretty serious wrongdoing. So means, motive, and opportunity, if that's the threshold, then many of them met that threshold. Colburn certainly met that threshold for getting that phone call. Light met that threshold for being Colburn's boss. And the specter of the $36 million hanging over them, that's and potentially pensions being involved. That's huge amount of motive right there. And at the higher level, the Vogels and the Kasuricks, they're like, they might uncover the shenanigans of the old boy network that's been going on that was used to frame Avery in the Penny Bernstein case. If that's not motive, I don't know what is. Law enforcement clearly has the means to do, as you went over exhaustively, Ben, they have the means to do that. The opportunity, yeah, if they found that RAV, they could have planted it.
There was something that really bothered me.
What was that?
How the prosecution tried to portray the defense's case. Like they were trying to suggest that the defense's case was that Manitowoc County sheriff's officers or their officers, your officers, or what does he say? He says that they shot or mutilated and killed and murdered this woman and planted, the evidence.
I remember him saying during the trial that no trace of Teresa was found in the trailer because she was killed in the garage. But she was in the trailer because her book and a bill of sale was in there. And if I'm not mistaken, Avery said he never got no receipt for a bill of sale.
Well, the defense wasn't implying any of the how they were trying to say that law enforcement is the one that killed her, but then you have Kratz trying to twist the narrative and try and say that they're saying that Manitowoc officers are the one that killed this woman, killed her, mutilated her, burnt her body, and then planted it on Avery's property when the defense never suggested that at all.
Right.
And in fact, every time they tried to create a defense, there was Kratz trying to say, oh, well, they're trying to suggest a third party or a alternative suspect other than Stephen
He's
Avery.
trying to change the narrative of the entire courtroom. Yes.
Thank you for listening to me ramble on.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Ben, for that. That's a pretty exhaustive theory, and it certainly fits the facts that are that we know that are out there. And if somebody wants to drill you on some of those facts, then that's part of the scientific method, that you have to modify your narrative to meet the facts that we know. But as a whole, thematically, what you've laid out sort of meets the meets the facts as we know them. So thank you for that. So does anybody have any closing comments? Okay. With that, again, my closing comment always is, people who don't have things to hide don't continue to hide things. It's not Stephen Avery that wants to hide things. It's not Kathleen Zellner that wants to hide things. She's not filing to have things put away. It's the state of Wisconsin that won't give us the RAV, that won't release certain phone calls that happened before Teresa disappeared. Why is that? So
they gave away the most critical evidence.
The bones, they're trying. If it's
they won't give us documents. They won't give us photos.
Yeah, FOIAs are being rejected.
People who don't have things to hide don't continue to hide things. And usually when you look for the guilty party, you look at who's changing their story and look at who's trying to hide things. I don't see where Stephen Avery's story has changed. The guiltist could say his story is massively changed. Show me where it is. I mean, he basically laid out his theory on his interview with law enforcement on the 9th. You can hear it on the in the phone calls, in the release phone calls. He does have some legitimate confusion about some of the the dates, the exact times that things happened on the 31st. But when he talks to his own family, when he talks to Barb, he says, "Oh yeah, there was a fire after all." He can't remember the exact day he burned the brush, but after he talks about, yeah, Barb, you're right, it happened on the 31st. I wouldn't say his story has changed. I'd say that he's been pretty solid, and he takes what he hears from his family, who he knows is not trying to lie to him, and embraces that as part of the truth. So with that, if nobody has anything else, this has been a Foul Play production.